So you'll be seeing things like type 2 muscle fibers, which are those basically the ones I'm going to have quite a lot of. Big, thick, dense. There's not lots of them, but they're quite big and thick and dense. Hello and welcome back to another vlog on YouTube and podcast on Spotify by the Fit Minds podcast. Coach Mariah here with my very pregnant belly, 32 weeks pregnant, and still discussing the very important topics of training, nutrition and mindset. So this podcast, I decided to change things up a little bit and focus a bit more on training this week. Today I'm going to be discussing purposeful programming, workouts built for your body and your goals. Discussing the importance of tailored or customized training programs. And we've all purchased a once-off training program online. We've had one advertised to us with the assumption that we'll be able to reach our individual goals that we've set for ourselves. And even so, some coaches boast that they design tailored training programs, everything's customized, when they simply don't. When you can tell, hold on, this program doesn't seem right for me. Or perhaps, you've engaged in an exercise type without considering the end outcome versus the desired result. Truth of the matter is, if you have specific goals, you will require specific programming. And this may mean the requirement to invest in a little bit more monetary wise, I call it investing, into our training program than we'd originally planned. We wouldn't seek medical advice from a doctor, asking to be prescribed whatever he gave the last guy, nor would you order food asking for the order the lady before you had. Customized variety in programming serves a purpose, in fact, many purposes. A well-tailored program can challenge you to reaching your full potential, prevent injury, manage ongoing injuries, strengthen underactive muscle groups, build muscle in areas you may lack, build muscle in areas you'd like to grow, improve your agility, speed, strength, coordination, endurance, cardiovascular health, mobility, stability, and the list goes on. But on the same topic, a single program tailored to specific goals probably won't provide all of the above simultaneously. It's not a one-stop shop, type of solution. And there is a very good reason for this. In order to tailor a program efficiently and effectively to a specific goal and or set of goals, we must first look at the major end goal and assess whether or not that may strongly conflict with our other goals. So we have to work backwards, basically, work from what you want to achieve versus what it's going to take to get there. For example, having a goal to become a competitive bodybuilder and also run a half marathon, or even competitive bodybuilding and running at all to improve cardiovascular fitness in general. So I've had quite a few people who've had the concerns that because they've started bodybuilding that they, are worried about their cardiovascular health. And there is a positive to strength training is that we do get some instances of improvement in cardiovascular health simply from strength training alone. So that's one thing to consider. Something we commonly see in coaching is clients not having a clear, defined goal or set of goals and or not understanding how these goals can often conflict strongly with one another. And the stimulus that might conflict as well, by the same token. How to prioritize goals, timeframes to achieve them, and looking at a game plan with a coach for mapping out a training and nutrition timeline to reach said goals. That is literally what we're trying to teach our clients, is like, okay, hold on. How do we stop distracting ourselves from every type of shiny object that we can and focus on what we really want to achieve? Reasons why we shouldn't engage in polar opposite forms of exercise for a specific and especially a high standard end goal are going to be the adaptations to the different kinds of exercise, okay? So you have to think about, yes, it might be fun running or you might enjoy a certain type of exercise, but it doesn't necessarily align with your end goal. You have to keep asking yourself that question. And people underestimate the impacts of exercise selection and exercise style and type and quality and quantity on the end result. So let's discuss type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers, which I've mentioned in previous podcasts, and their roles for different forms of exercise. So you'll be seeing things like type 2 muscle fibers, which are those basically the ones I'm going to have quite a lot of. Big, thick, dense. There's not lots of them, but they're quite big and thick and dense muscle fibers. And they are designed literally for moving heavy weight. They're strong and they're thick. And that's the whole concept of bodybuilding, is the muscles are bigger. So who would fall into the type 2 muscle fiber predominant body types? Powerlifters and bodybuilders. It's pretty simple. Okay. Then we have, I guess, what we could kind of call, a hybrid athlete. Rather, it would be things like sprinters, some cyclists and swimmers. Okay. And you only have to look at the build of these particular athletes. Sprinters, cyclists, swimmers, they're not particularly thin. They tend to be kind of somewhere in the middle of medium build. And that's because they have a combination of type 1 and type 2 fibers, or otherwise known as type 2A fibers. And then we have long distance runners, which, if done well enough, and if they are very conditioned for competition running, they should have predominantly and only type 1 muscle fibers, which are going to be long and thin, and there'll be lots of them. So in comparison to a bodybuilder, a endurance-based athlete, especially long distance runners, will have far more of these tiny little fibers that are quite thin, so they don't take up a lot of room. So it's actually a common misconception thinking that, endurance-based athletes don't have a lot of muscle. I mean, yes, in the way of kilos of muscle, perhaps not, but in the way of amount of fibers and type 1 fibers, absolutely, certainly they probably have more than a bodybuilder in some cases. So in the way of hybrid athletes, this is something that's definitely been thrown around quite a lot fashionably in the industry of late, is these hybrid athletes who tend to fall somewhere in the middle. So they might, for example, be a person who works on their strength, but also their running. And, they may also do obstacle courses, agility courses, that sort of stuff. And so you'll find that they don't often look like a bodybuilder, not to the size, they're not huge, like really, really muscular, but they're also not very thin either. They kind of have this interesting combination physique. And that's no coincidence. They fall into that hybrid athlete category. So the purpose, though, for a hybrid athlete would be if, for example, you were a lifestyle client and that's what you wanted to do, for sure. But if you wanted to be a hybrid athlete and also win marathons, you probably wouldn't be able to, because you weren't focusing enough on the marathons. Or if you wanted to be a hybrid athlete and a bodybuilder, you could probably try to, but you may not be as competitive. Okay. Why must we consider the form of exercise we're engaging in for the outcome we want to achieve? Okay, so why do we have to think about that? And it's literally because we are, not only what we eat, but also the way that we treat our bodies. Okay, and understanding if, and I keep saying this, if the stimulus aligns with your very major and prioritized goal. For example, engaging in F45 in competitive bodybuilding, probably not. Okay, I have seen some people who have trained at F45 and have gone and competed in bodybuilding shows, and they've done well, but probably not top tier. Okay, they're not ever going to be pro-worthy athletes. Because why? Because they haven't applied themselves specifically to progressive overload and what we know works in the bodybuilding world. Or group bodyweight classes, okay, and trying to build muscle. I've seen lots of people trying to do pump classes and they're like, how come my glutes aren't growing? Well, they're not under enough resistance. You're just bouncing them around doing star jumps. Or powerlifting and improving running times. So there are a couple athletes out there on the internet currently that are powerlifters and runners, but really, in essence, if you want to focus on one more than the other, you will always get a better result by doing so. Or, and another example I see quite often is asking to have things like burpees put into your program, or skipping, for example, but not fully understanding the why behind your request. What purpose does that exercise selection serve towards achieving your big ticket end goal? Do they serve as an aid, or will they perhaps impede on your end goal? Doing burpees, but if you're a powerlifter or if you are engaging in a bodybuilding competition, what is that actually going to accomplish? Are you growing muscle? Are you maintaining muscle? Are you just moving your body around for, the sake of it, jumping up and down on the spot? And when we remove the novelty of an exercise, the excitement of an exercise, we think less about the, this looks cool and this feels fun. What is its purpose? What purpose does the exercise serve? What's the outcome? It is possible to do both, but rarely to do both well. Okay, so of course it's possible to engage in lots of different types of exercise and stimulus, but is it possible to engage in these types of exercise and excel, to become, athletic level quality at that particular type of endeavor? And the answer is no. And we only have to look at our elite athletes and the way that they train in their specific sports as to how they get there. And this is why we should logically tailor our training stimuli to match our specific goal and establish the acceptance of the outcome prior to doing so. So when you engage in an endeavor with a coach and you say, look, I really want to do this, this is my goal, you must remember that you have communicated this to your coach. You said to your coach, I want to be a bodybuilder. Okay, or if I have triathletes, I want to be a triathlete, I want to improve my run times. And so generally, if your coach is skilled enough and cluey enough, they'll understand, cool, I need to program the stimulus required for this particular end outcome. Okay, and they'll often discuss as well, if you have strongly conflicting goals, how and why you want to accomplish these, okay, and whether or not you want to accomplish them very well, or maybe a little bit of each one of them well, and whether or not you want to be competitive in those particular endeavors. And as they say, you can be a jack of all trades and a master of none, which is so applicable to exercise. Athletes who are champion tennis players spend most of their time playing tennis. Champion runners work on their run times and running economy, etc. However, there are some benefits to incorporating strength and resistance training for the benefit of endurance sports like running and cycling. The crossover does work here from strength training to the benefits for endurance-based athletes for the purpose of strengthening muscles and tendons and ligaments. But strangely, it actually doesn't work in the opposite direction. So there is little to no benefit. In fact, sometimes it can actually impact negatively running or endurance-based activities on strength training outcomes. So running or endurance training yields no benefit to growing more dense muscle. Okay, so it's one important thing to understand. If you're a bodybuilder and you're currently running and you want to be a better bodybuilder, please stop running. Okay, it's not because running is the devil. It's just that you're just not going to progress with your strength, with your muscle mass, if you continue to run, which interrupts that stimulus. Okay. And honestly, it's just where the evidence is in sports science. We just know that this exists from plenty of studies. Honestly, it yields no benefit to growing more dense muscle or increasing strength for, say, bodybuilding or powerlifting. And if anything, can inhibit, hold back strength or stifle type 2 muscle fiber growth, and yes, even reduce type 2 muscle growth and the dense muscle mass over time. So weirdly enough, running can actually then take over with type 1 muscle fibers, then replacing the type 2 muscle fibers, and we end up with this reduction in type 2, so reduction in that kind of thick, dense muscle, and increase in this thin, wiry, lots and lots of them, type 1 muscle fibers, and we end up, weirdly enough, getting skinnier, or at least losing that mass, that large amount of muscle mass over time. So, interestingly enough, people have always thought it was severe muscle wastage. Yes and no. We definitely see an impact of running on basically it's your body, but basically trying to say, or do, is support the endurance-based activity as best as possible. And that's by growing those type 1 muscle fibers, which support that activity more so. They do different things, type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers, if you want to research them. So increasing type 1 muscle fibers obviously then allows for the adaptation to support the endurance training, okay? So if you're thinking about now incorporating endurance training and cardiovascular activities into your training program, if you currently have the goal to grow significant muscle mass, I would strongly discourage you to do so. So if you want larger amounts of muscle in your shoulders, arms, quads, glutes, if you want that to pop, endurance training is just not going to assist that process. And it is a hard pill to swallow. This is often why I must have the argument or battle with my clients who are engaging in bodybuilding endeavors, especially in their off season. This doesn't mean I'm against endurance training, okay? Because I think people often mistake the way that I talk about endurance-based training and bodybuilding endeavors as if I am favored towards bodybuilding and resistance training. And that's not the case at all. I actually have triathletes on as clients currently. I have endurance-based athletes currently as clients. I specialize in bodybuilding, absolutely, because I've fallen into that. And I'm a bodybuilder myself. But, currently I'm finishing a postgrad, and all of my studies are on endurance-based athletes. So I absolutely and wholeheartedly understand, and if anything, have a passion for working with endurance athletes. It's just less common for me. And so a lot of the time I'm having to deter strength-based athletes from engaging in excessive endurance-based endeavors. But I'm also having to encourage my endurance athletes to incorporate strength training into their program because, again, as I mentioned, strength training can benefit endurance. Endurance does not benefit strength training. And obviously when I have this argument, when they're often attempting to bargain their way into incorporating running or endurance-based cardio into their training program, to which my response is usually, do you want to be a bodybuilder or a marathon runner? Yes, of course, it's beneficial to improve cardiovascular health, but this can also be done through basic daily walking. Okay, you do not have to be running to improve your cardiovascular based health. Your heart health is not reliant upon getting your heart rate up to that, higher rate and sustained for long durations. And obviously with walking, it will have little to no impact on building muscle mass over time, as long as the step count is kept to a reasonable amount daily. So as long as it's not kind of in excess of, say, like once we start to get that 16,000 step mark, we've actually seen some negative results facilitated in the way of maintaining strength. So, that tends to be kind of, especially through dieting phases, where I say to my clients, look, there really is no benefit to increasing this past this point. It will only further impact training. But obviously not having a super low step count either. Like if you're sub 5,000 steps a day and you're sitting on your bum all day, well then of course you're going to struggle with, climbing a set of stairs because your body just isn't used to moving that way, or certainly for that longer period of time of just even something as simple as walking. There's a very fine line, okay, between deviating from a major goal to chase a small one short term. So important you understand that. And incorporating minor changes to programming to improve cardiovascular health. Okay, that is possible. There is another assumption that incorporating cardiovascular activities into an already well-established, well-rounded strength training program will speed up fat loss or buffer additional fat gain when trying to purposefully grow muscle. To a certain extent, absolutely, we can utilize, additional cardiovascular-based activities to use calories not used in workouts, but you would hope to think that if you're trying to grow muscle that you would almost try to use as much of those calories as possible to go towards your strength training bout, rather than thinking, can I use the leftovers for something else? And this is why it's often important to understand that when you go into a surplus and you're growing muscle, you're probably going to gain some body fat, and this is where we have mini cuts that come in there as well. And so cardio is kind of one of those things where it's a double-edged sword. Yes, we can use it absolutely to increase energy expenditure, but at what cost to our performance in our lifts? The truth of the matter is, there is no requirement to engage in additional endurance cardiovascular-based activities for fat loss purposes, as generally these types of activities will actually require larger amounts of carbohydrates to fuel the heart rate range in which we see required for long duration cardio-based activities. So, when you're walking, the predominant fuel source is fats, okay? It's obviously utilized a lot slower, but that's the facts, okay? With endurance-based training, we see that that higher, longer duration sustained, I think it's past 2 minutes or so, 2 to 4 minutes. Once we get past that point, we actually require more carbohydrates to fuel that activity and that endeavor more effectively. This is why additional walks, as I mentioned, are recommended for bodybuilders to be utilized as a tool to burn additional calories without requiring the presence of significant carbohydrates, but not to the extent that will impact their energy to train, as I mentioned. Basically, I've discussed this in previous podcasts at length, and I won't go too deep into it, okay? But more is not always more. We must look at the specific goals we have and the desired outcome in relation to what we're going to achieve from engaging in the stimulus provided. So in short, if you're looking at engaging in a powerlifting competition, the best kind of training program, yes, obviously, will look like improving your powerlifting lifts, okay? And engaging the stimulus which matches your goal best. So it's no coincidence that the type of training required to accomplish your goal generally looks like the type of competition you're going to enter into or the type of exercises you'll be doing to improve in that endeavor. You're not doing some sort of like outrageously different type of exercise. It's going to align very much with what you're doing, and that kind of makes sense. It's like two puzzle pieces. If you do have conflicting goals, it might be that you want to take a hybrid athlete approach. Perhaps maybe you're a lifestyle client and you're simply looking at improving your strength, your endurance, your mobility, and preventing injuries. And this is completely okay. I don't like to beat on too much about sticking to a particular type of stimulus if, let's say, you don't want to compete. You just want to tick all the boxes, and you probably can do that effectively, but not if you want to be competitive in a particular sport or exercise endeavor. You absolutely can become a hybrid lifestyle athlete as long as your major goal does not involve competing in a particular sport, which requires a very particular style of training to achieve. In some cases, hybrid athletes can cross over into particular sports as well. They can. So, as I mentioned prior to this, things like sprinting, HIIT training, sprinting, and then like swimming, there are some sports where we have this kind of hybrid approach, and this might mean that this lifestyle could work well for that athlete, but all in all, if they're still going to compete in that endeavor, they're still going to have to engage in that endeavor predominantly. Oftentimes, it's about accepting that consistency is king with everything. Applying a specific stimulus consistently on repeat over a period of time is how we naturally condition our bodies to adapt and improve that with that particular stimulus. So practice. Yes, it still applies. It's been decades of watching people in team sports specifically, it seems so normalized for them to practice and for them to have preseason training, etc. And yet, for some reason, in individual sports, sometimes we find athletes tend to deviate from the stimulus required, and maybe because they're not in a group environment, I'm not sure. So, repetition is not necessarily a bad thing. If you are looking at furthering the development of skill acquisition, strength, or endurance, for example. Absolutely. Boredom can come into play, where I've seen clients mention to me that repeating the same workouts each week doesn't feel exciting or engaging to them. The most important thing you can do in this situation, especially if you are looking at gaining lean muscle mass or entering into a bodybuilding competition, is understanding that repetition of stimulus is key. The excitement should come from the progression in the lifts programmed for you rather than the constant variation within your programming. A great coach will be able to tailor a program that has significant variety across the week and your workout days, but a program should not be drastically altered, specifically with strength training, sooner than 12 weeks, especially with regards to resistance training, bodybuilding, etc., due to the nature of the 3-month mark being where we see the peak of an individual starting to reach their full potential within that particular training block. So if you sell yourself short and change your training sooner, you actually will basically be leaving gains behind. Constantly changing your training every 4 weeks or every week if you're going to F45 classes or group classes is obviously very exciting and mentally stimulating for sure, but won't necessarily see you progress over time, not tangibly and not numerically, or there's no sort of data to measure there, because there is no room for progression with constant change. If you are not tracking progression in your particular lifts, for example, and this is where numbers come into play. This is where the notion of progressive overload is suggested. And progression in strength and resistance training can look like additional reps, adding those, or an increase in weight lifted, or both, for any particular exercise from session to session, so from week to week. Progression can look vastly different across different types of training programs. For example, An endurance program will likely incorporate some strength training as well, but we are looking at the progression of the run time specifically, and yes, obviously some of the strength training progression as well. But the focus for an endurance athlete endeavouring to compete in endurance-based sports would be on improving their running economy and run times predominantly. It doesn't mean that they wouldn't be focusing on strength increases in their strength program. But this may look like trying to make weekly and monthly improvements over time. And again, having them measurable, tangible, something they can track. Very difficult to do if it's constantly being changed. Another important fact to consider when working with a coach to customize a training program for you is prevention of injury. This is something that most coaches should be doing naturally anyway, but unfortunately in the industry, we just don't see a lot of it happening anymore or at all. If you are finding you are repeatedly hurting yourself with the same injury and it's exacerbated over and over and over, perhaps the training program that you have may not be suitable for your needs. Or even some of the exercise selection or even order of exercises, which is something that not a lot of people consider, is like, is this program designed and the exercises designed in the right order to actually advantage this client in areas that they need to work on? Each individual person will have a completely different anatomical and genetic structure. Things like the length of your femur bone, okay, so from the hip to the knee, the width of our hips, and even width and length of your torso, okay? So when we start considering this, we start thinking about, for example, someone's frame, like literally what can support the exercises and the load. This is why I don't believe that there is a one-size-fits-all style of training for any individual person. Even so with strength training, I don't think that everybody should be doing barbell squats. I don't think everybody should be doing deadlifts. Unpopular opinion. For example, as I mentioned, barbell work for taller athletes specifically. You often find that the taller the person is, the more they struggle with barbells. And what's interesting, I'd like you to message me about this if this is the case for you, because this is what I found with, I've actually been in practice for 7 years or so, possibly longer, maybe 8. Losing count. And I really have seen that there is this common theme with just taller, like on average taller women or taller men really struggling with barbell work and actually being put off barbell work based on the fact that they just keep re-injuring themselves. I've seen time and time again, taller individuals injuring themselves under a barbell or on top of, and getting quite frustrated with that process. But if you really think about it, this comes down to a couple of factors. Barbells may not be the most functional or suitable piece of equipment to use for that particular person, okay? If you think about it, a barbell is a fixed length piece of equipment. It's a fixed weight as well, and we're adding weights on the side. So we're not really thinking much about how that piece of equipment fits in well with the person that we are programming for. We can't change the length of the barbell. And there's a few other things to consider. With a longer spine and longer femurs, we have a larger room for error, okay? With a wide and long piece of equipment placed on our back. So if you think about it, you've got this tall person here with this big long pole. And so it's like, if you think about that in motion, there's a lot going on there. If you've got a shorter person with a longer pole, there's almost like, if you imagine that less can go wrong because there's just less space to work with. Well, that's the way I see it. But things like center of gravity and pivot points will be completely different to somebody who may be shorter with a shorter distance to travel. So if you imagine even their squat path is shorter, much shorter, and differing variances in planes of movement, posterior, anterior, lateral, or horizontal, and longitudinal, or longitudinal or vertical. So we've got to consider that the base that we're working with, if that changes, then would we not change the stimulus, the piece of equipment, to best suit that person? In this case, and especially in the bodybuilding world, when we look at effectively growing as much muscle as possible and as efficiently as possible whilst preventing an injury, it might just be that the barbell work isn't your cup of tea. My partner and myself don't do any barbell work at all. And ever since removing barbell work from our programs, we have not injured ourselves. In fact, I don't have a single barbell exercise in my current programming, and I don't often program barbell work for my clients either. The bang for your buck is just not there, really. If I've got a powerlifting client, absolutely, because they have to work with barbells, but there's no sort of You're not obliged to. You don't have to follow gym rules and think, oh, I've got to use a barbell. And even so, the wonderful Humble Smith machine is fantastic for barbell work because, again, it provides that added stability. Usually you'll find that some clients will enjoy barbell work more than others, and this is likely due to the fact that the skill acquisition is much higher for them, and they don't seem to have a lot of pain or trouble executing the exercise, in which case, absolutely, then approach the barbell work full speed ahead and embrace those exercises if they work for you. This is also why it's important to discuss with your coach which exercises you're struggling with, the potential to improve them before throwing them in the bin, okay? Because sometimes people think, okay, well, Mariah's saying, if I struggle with an exercise, I don't have to do it. But it might not necessarily be your frame and structure, and maybe the skill acquisition itself. So maybe you can improve with that movement before concluding it's not right for you. Maybe obviously then, if that doesn't work, considering an alternative. And trust me, there are alternatives to exercises. There are so many of them for lots of different movement patterns. For some people, it might be that a decline chest press doesn't agree with their shoulder, but an incline chest press does. Smart exercise selection plays a major role in customized training, and for some clients, they may have trouble activating, for example, their quadriceps. This might look like then working on releasing their quads themselves prior to engaging in training, and possibly starting the workout with a quad dominant exercise. So there are lots of different ways we can tackle this. Whereas somebody who has underactive hamstrings may begin their workout with a hamstring dominant exercise. Kind of makes sense to get them firing. For a client who might have uneven strength from left to right sides, maybe in their lats, for example, might have to look at what's causing that in the first place. Possibly tightness in the subscap or trap or chest or even rear delt or rotator cuff. So again, can be many, many reasons. And this is why I don't often like to, diagnose people's injuries online. I think it's much harder to do that. So this is why I often refer outwards to a physio for something a little bit more complex. And then we come back and we reprogram and restructure based on physio's recommendations, which is very easy for coaches to do because it's just thinking a little bit more logically and as a solutions-focused mindset moving forward with their programming. It could be internal rotation of the shoulder joint, as that's a common cause due to daily postural habits. So literally everyone's slouching forward, then we get the shortening of the chest, and we get the tightening of the chest. And so people then mistake and think, okay, well, maybe I need to train my chest more, but if anything, if you think about it, if we're kind of slouching over and internal rotation is the problem, one of the solutions, the simple solutions, is actually then getting to our training and getting into our stretch and release and figuring out a way then to reverse that and do the complete opposite of what we've been doing to cause that postural imbalance. This is why, as well, getting massage frequently can help to assist with tightness and imbalances, and even incorporating isolation, unilateral and isolateral exercises. It might be if you've got one lat that's stronger than the other, this is where we can incorporate that isolation. And this is why, again, specific programming is so important for each individual person, because in this case, it might be that, you might need to isolate your sides. And it then allows for the lagging side to catch up. Even so, having your coach incorporate stretch and release work into your program, which is most appropriate for your muscular imbalances and tightness. This is something that I do with every single one of my clients. Each of them has a stretch and release protocol prior to commencing their training sessions. It is just a non-negotiable, and if they are seeing injuries and imbalances and impingements and all sorts of stuff arise, and they're not engaging in their stretch work, this is likely contributing to that. Okay, because they have that tightness, they have that issue there where they're not actually releasing themselves before they're then engaging in exercise to then contract the muscle tissue. If you think about it, if you go into a workout and you're really tight, everything's tight, you're bunched up, you've been sitting on a laptop all day, and then you go to train, imagine trying to get a full extension and contraction, of muscle tissue. It's just not going to happen. And so I believe in stretch and release prior to training to elongate muscle tissue and allow you a better range of motion. It actually makes a lot of sense. And that's the whole concept of warming up. Warming up generally I find is probably more applicable as in warming up muscle tissue for things like running, etc., or warming up joints, getting blood into the muscles. For strength training, definitely release work, and even for endurance training, definitely release work. But I like the concept of elongating muscle tissue and getting it to basically stretch out as much as possible before we then contract the tissue. So in any case though, you do not need to increase the repetitions on the side which is lagging. Something I hear commonly is people saying, you know, if I've got my left lat isn't as strong, do I need to do more reps? And the answer is no. It's important to match your sides as much as possible. And if this means that one side, so your right side, needs to take a break with progression for a little while to allow the other to catch up, that is okay. We often discuss the importance of prioritizing the exercises which target the muscle groups that you would like to work on the most first. So for example, if you're wanting to grow your glutes, it might be that, and this is a very similar principle to having underactive glutes, but if you want to grow them, you know, it might be that focusing on a glute dominant exercise at the start of the workout helps to serve that purpose. Why? Because most of the carbohydrates you've consumed or your stored glycogen will then go towards pushing for that exercise in particular. So sometimes if you want to progress in particular exercises, it might be smarter to put them at the start of your program. This doesn't necessarily apply to every exercise. For example, starting a workout with calf raises, my partner learnt this the hard way recently. Actually, he was trying to grow his calves. They are growing, but he did his own programming and put them next to each other, and unfortunately shortened his calf prior to starting a leg press. So I've jumped in there and helped to alternate a few exercises there for him so that we don't end up with that problem. And this isn't as a result, again, of my programming. It was just he was doing his own programming, and then I was like, all right, you know what, I'm going to help out with this because this looks like it's going to be a problem over time. So again, you know, we can have people who have experience with programming for themselves, and absolutely, I've got this by myself, but by the same token, if you could have someone from the outside, an outsider's perspective with your programming, come in and actually help you improve and prevent injury, why would you not utilize that? Just because you want to grow your calves, this may unfortunately, as I said, result in tightness of the calf, shortening the calf muscle, especially if you're doing 2 in a row, and then you're engaging in something like a leg press afterwards. And as a result, you could exacerbate or cause an injury in the back of the knee, which is what happened for him. So thankfully, that was a good learning curve for him. And look, early on in my training days, you know, a good 11 years ago, I would do a lot of hip extended movements and like shortened, be in a position of shortened hip flexors and shortened quads. And so I'd be doing things like a leg press, a squat, and a deadlift, you know, one after the other. And unfortunately with that, you see that you're in that same shortened position, and that can then obviously as a result, you know, cause things like shortened hip flexors and shortened quadriceps, really tight quadriceps, and then lead to things like back and knee injuries. So it will depend on each individual and be managed as a case-by-case scenario though, okay? For each individual person, they're going to have completely different imbalances and particular ways they train as well, so their own neuromuscular patterns. In some cases, however, trouble with exercise selection may be due to the fact that there is an imbalance, tightness, or some sort of neuromuscular movement pattern that needs improving over time. It's important not to completely ignore these and avoid exercises altogether simply because you are struggling with them. Okay, when I said before, look, you know, barbell work, that's probably because barbell work is over-programmed and there are lots of different alternatives to that, okay? But in a case, for example, if a person is struggling with any sort of isolated movement like a Bulgarian split squat, a lunge, anything like that, we really need to tackle, okay, what's going on that's basically stopping this person from being able to isolate their legs. And not ignore it, not just go, okay, well, you know what, we won't isolate at all. I mean, in the case of pregnancy, absolutely, you know, trying to remove and avoid isolation, weirdly enough, is something that I've only really ever seen done quite strongly in pregnancy, just due to the fact that the hips shift quite a lot and there is that relaxin in there that can unfortunately then impede on a person's stability. And yeah, it's very easy to basically throw your hips out while being pregnant. This is why obviously working with a physio, a movement specialist, etc. in person, so important that you have it in person. You don't have to see them every week, you can see them every couple of weeks or months, kind of like seeing a specialist. It can be incredibly beneficial. It might be that you visit the physio for a particular injury or imbalance, and the physio addresses the movement pattern, tightness, mobility or stability issue that they need working on. And the reason why we talk about physio is it's like, physio is literally a physical thing. They're literally seeing a person in person for a reason. They need to assess you physically. Very different to online coaching. If you are an online physio, I take my hat off to you. It is very difficult to do. But by the same token, if you're working with a coach who programs for specific sports performance and nutrition, they're not a physio. It's a very different role. This doesn't mean if you have to see a physio that you're broken or that you just aren't good at something. More so that this is how your movement patterns have been established over time and ingrained, and this may take some correction and lots of practice in reversing. I often work with physios and clients in correcting and managing persistent injuries, imbalances, and mobility trouble. And the wonderful thing too, as coaches over time, is that when we do work more often with physios, and I have done this for years, we actually start to learn the processes and how to program accordingly to, like with the recommendations of the physio. A person might say to you, I've got knee pain. Okay, could be one of many different things, and I've had people who've had knee pain and it's been because they've had tight calves. I've had people with knee pain because they've had plantar fasciitis in their foot. I've had people who have had knee pain because they've had shortened quads, tight hip flexors, tight hamstrings, the list goes on. They may be internally rotating their knee because they have a tight QL and psoas, but again, very difficult to assess this online, and something that is just honestly best left to somebody in person who specializes in this particular area. So that obviously over time then we can iron out the creases and adjust their programming to prevent further injury. And the great thing is I have had fantastic success with this type of method. So basically refer to physio then does an assessment, basically gives me the summary and says X, Y, Z, even if it's just things like limitations, progression, regression, things like reintroducing certain exercises slowly, types of movement patterns that we need to avoid, or maybe in certain orders or whatever it might be, but they don't have to be that specific. Generally, if I have enough information, I can actually then go away with that and then redesign the program in a way that best fits that person, and time again it works. And they don't have to give me a lot of direction with programming. Weirdly enough, I take over the programming side of things, but it's just more about understanding those limitations and also things like the release work required for that individual person that might then target that particular issue. In any case, it may require a customized solution. The person, they might have tight hip flexors or simply trouble with proprioception of their feet to the ground. So, that's what I have trouble with connection. They might have internal rotation of the knee, as I said, or knees, or collapsing of their arches in, say, a squat or a deadlift. And mine is definitely collapsing of arches. I have that problem. So there's literally a multitude of different examples. I might have a client who has trouble activating or using their hamstrings in a hip extended movement. So again, it will look vastly different from client to client. But yes, the customized solution is used to tackle the problem long term. So oftentimes it'll be a case-by-case scenario or situation. You work with a skilled and transparent coach, and it shouldn't be an issue at all. And I have found it hasn't been an issue with my clients using these methods. It's incredibly important to understand, no matter what program you're engaging in, that you're using correct form for any exercise, including running or cycling. I know, yes, there's form for running and cycling, or strength training, powerlifting. It's going to be incredibly crucial in preventing injury and using the right muscle groups that you're intending to target. Okay, so great example, had my partner do it, like using him as an example at the moment because he is not working with any particular coach, but I get to train with him. We were doing hip thrusts the other day. I put them into his program because I did make a few adjustments for him when he designed his own. I actually went in and changed it a little bit. And he was saying, I'm really feeling it in my back. And basically I just got him to slow down, reduce the range of motion so he wasn't then going past that kind of horizontal pivot point, and actually really focus on engaging and squeezing his glutes. And the position of his feet as well was a big part of it. And funnily enough, we went from then feeling it all in his back to then feeling it only in his glutes. So there you go. And it is just a form thing. It's like something that's just often overlooked and you probably wouldn't be able to notice at first glance, but certainly understanding the concept behind it and why we do it, and why we have to be very mindful of whether we can feel the muscle groups working that we intend to be working. And very rarely will we ever be targeting the lower back because everybody has and seems to have very overdominant, overactive erectors due to the the sit stand for prolonged periods of time that we see in underactive lower abdominals. Again, a lot of these problems that you're seeing with clients, imbalances, are very common because we all have incredibly similar lifestyles and daily lifestyles. It's also important to have a program which challenges us sufficiently. Okay, I've seen time and time again many people engage in bodyweight training programs or group classes, F45 classes, fit stop classes, even CrossFit. Okay, and the reason why I use these examples is because it's just constantly changing programming, like from week to week all the time, and you're getting the same training that someone else is getting, so it's kind of like cookie cutter training, isn't it? And this usually sees them either not engaging in exercise which is challenging enough in the right way, or perhaps too challenging and then resulting in overexertion, overreaching, overtraining, and or injury. This again highlights the benefits of working with a coach who can establish your current individual capabilities, things like your mobility, so your level of mobility, stability, strength, and endurance levels. Even the frequency of your training might differ. It might be if you are pregnant, for example, that you're engaging in maybe 3 to 4 maintenance sessions weekly, versus outside of your pregnancy, perhaps you might look at training 4 to 5 times a week. Okay. If you have taken a considerable amount of time off exercise, it may not be the smartest decision to go back into a 5 or 6 day training program straight off the mark after not training for so long, and just literally because your body's not used to that stimulus. It's important to protect your central and sympathetic nervous system, as burnout is a reality when engaging in a program that may not be suitable for your current capabilities, requirements, and goals. This is why you should keep an eye out for cumulative fatigue. If you're finding that your recovery from sessions just isn't quite there, discuss this with your coach. Okay, let them know, I feel like shit. It might be that you need to reduce your total sets, exercises, or even sessions for the week. Without adequate recovery, we also struggle to progress and improve with our training over time. But it also might mean that you need to actually consume the calories given to you, because sometimes people are under consuming their calories, and this is why we have that cumulative fatigue and trouble with recovery, or under consuming carbohydrates, which is quite common, or in general might need a break from dieting. So it kind of defeats the purpose of going in blazing guns, right? Yes, the body does adapt to stimulus over time, but it does require gradual and adequate recovery in order to do so. Hence the concept of an effective and efficient training program, because again, it's not more is more, and also it's also not less is less, meaning, it's either smash yourself like crazy or you're only doing bodyweight sessions. There is that happy medium. Probably the most common occurrence I do see with women is that they are not pushing themselves hard enough in the gym and are selling themselves short of what they're actually capable of achieving. So basically, they're a lot stronger than they think they are. I do see a fair amount of overreaching and overtraining, absolutely, but more commonly with my male clients who seem to overdo it. Or even my high-achieving female athletes. I don't mean to be sexist, because it's either my men or my women who are very driven, who know how to put the foot on the pedal, but don't know when to put the foot on the brake, when to rest and recoup. So the importance of a tailored training program doesn't just sit with the training sessions themselves, but also the frequency of rest and the understanding of when your body is screaming out for a break. And this is where, and I probably should discuss this in another podcast, but auto-regulation comes in. And this is something that I actually teach my clients how to do, is how to auto-regulate. I've got quite a few clients I've worked with for a few years now, and I'm really proud of them when they know that they need a deload. They just take it. So love that. They don't need to wait for me to give them permission. You'd be surprised, how much more you could achieve if you simply fueled your requirements adequately as well. So one of the most common reasons I see for overreaching or overtraining is underfueling of carbohydrates, as I mentioned previously. Most people don't realize just how many carbohydrates are required for their chosen exercise endeavor, and they often have a very negative association with carbohydrates, but as human beings, we actually run very well off carbs. In fact, that is the fuel source preferred for moderate to higher intensity activities, which is considered to be purposeful exercise. Not to mention the protein required to repair muscle tissue post-training, understandably adequate sleep and water intake daily as well. So this is, again, it's all a happy marriage, and I know that I'm deviating a little bit, but a well-structured, tailored training program can only work really well for you if you are also pairing it with adequate nutrition and sleep and water protocol. To finish up, I cannot stress enough the importance of working with a coach. Okay, I've said this all the way through. It doesn't have to be me. I really, I'm not trying to push the narrative that you need to sign up for coaching. And some people do find that after this podcast, they go, I think I might want to work with you. But it really is important to work with a coach who understands your individualistic needs, who you click with, and prioritizes, the investment that you should be making into your training program, right? So they're going to tell you, hey, look, this is going to cost X, Y, Z or whatever. It's important you understand that as well, that you come to terms with that. That it's not going to be cheap and it's not going to be expensive, but it's also not going to be $50. Here's a program and off you go. Instead of obviously purchasing that once-off cookie cutter program from the internet. Don't get me wrong, I currently do sell once-off training programs on my website, but there's a reason why I haven't updated these or changed these over time, because they're simply an introduction and encouragement to those who may not be able to afford a tailored training program. And the way that I structured them was that they should be fairly suitable for a majority of the population to engage in. My recommendation always sits with the idea that each individual person has individualistic needs based on their goals, requirements, and enjoyment of exercise, of course. So the eventual progression to tailored training is inevitably a requirement. It's also crucial to understand that you're not always going to enjoy every single training session that you attend. Of course, we want our training to keep us entertained or mentally stimulated. Your exercise, though, is not a circus act or performance. Whenever you feel lost with your exercise or training program, perhaps you're starting to get itchy for a change just because you want to change, remember your end goal, what you originally set out to achieve. And if that's changed, that's probably when you do need to change your training. And what you're wanting to achieve in the long run, and keeping sight of that, keeping focus of that. This can often serve as a reminder into persistence through those periods where your love or passion of training takes a backseat. Again, it's like a relationship with anything in life. Whether it's your career, your friendships, or your romantic relationships, you'll always go through those ups and downs of being in love with the process. Give yourself as much encouragement as you need to know your body and mind well enough to communicate with your coach when you are ready for the next challenge or the next step up. Look forward to progression and improvement over time in a set and structured training program. This can fuel the feeling of accomplishment that you so strongly desire. As I said many times before, it's the small daily wins which add up to the big wins over time. So it's not about doing grandiose things or, these crazy efforts and learning how to backflip, but probably more so things like celebrating the fact you got an extra couple of reps, or, your weight went up for your lateral raises or your hip thrusts. As I said many times before as well, it isn't, when we look at the bigger picture, right, it isn't something you're going to achieve overnight. So if you are getting impatient with that process, maybe understand that anything worth doing, right, anything worth achieving has never been done in a couple of days. Rome wasn't built in a day. Sometimes it is the most boring and repetitious, but well-structured and well-rounded training plans, executed well and with purpose, which can yield the most exciting and rewarding results over the long term. Thanks a lot for listening to today's podcast. I really did enjoy this one. I was so much looking forward to doing something on specific training. It's something that I admittedly, as a coach in my earlier days, it was probably one of my weaker points. And now as the years have gone on, I have become far more skilled in this area and understanding of individualistic requirements for each person, and that more so in the field of injury and injury prevention for sure. It's very easy to understand people have different goals, but to understand that people move differently and function differently is a whole nother kettle of fish. Thanks a lot. Looking forward to doing another podcast with you soon. Bye.